Welcome to Slugs and Steins. My name is David Hansen, and as a UC Santa Cruz Alumni Council member, I'd like to welcome you to our monthly speaker series. For those who are new, our Slugs and Steins series engages a UC Santa Cruz faculty member in a discussion with you, the local community of the Silicon Valley, and our extended community online, with the goal of making us all Renaissance women and men. We want it to feel just like here at UC Santa Cruz, sitting in class, but with drinks. This will be our 12th virtual event, as it's been a full year now since we were together at the Forager in San Jose. We do miss seeing you. That said, I, for one, have also enjoyed what our professors can offer us over Zoom. When this all ends, it will, I'm reassured, we'll try to merge the best of both. Mike, another volunteer organizer, is with me tonight. We're both alumni and spend our days in entrepreneurial companies, Silicon Valley style. He'll be helping me with the Q&A, and you'll hear more from him at the end. Before we start, we'd like to take a poll to get to know our audience and where you are tuning in from this evening. Please take a moment to answer a few questions that will pop up on your screen, and we'll share the results after we've given everyone a moment to respond. Hoping that you've seen it, and the results we'll show for you soon. We'll move on. Again, apropos the end of the pandemic, and we're very excited to raise a virtual Stein with Rebecca London, Associate Professor of Sociology at UC Santa Cruz. Her research focuses on ways that communities, educational institutions, and community organizations support young people to be healthy and successful. She advocates for and utilizes a community-engaged research approach to co-construct research and knowledge with those who can benefit the most from the research. She has conducted research in multiple fields, including K-12, post-secondary education, cross-sector approaches to whole student development, health and wellness, after-school programs, and social welfare programs. Professor London is author of Rethinking Recess, Creating Safe and Healthy Playtimes for All Children in School, and is co-editor of From Data to Action, a community approach to improving youth outcomes. Her recent work has been published in journals such as Teaching Sociology, Journal of School Health, Educational Researcher, and the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. A few times during this event, we'll stop for questions. If you have questions for our professor, please type them in the Zoom's Q&A box below. You don't need to wait to submit your questions. Type them in at any time. If you see someone else's question that you like, you can upvote it, and we'll ask it sooner. The talk is being recorded in a few days. You'll be able to find it on UC Santa Cruz Arts and Lectures YouTube channel. We'll post the link in our social media channels and follow-up emails. Okay, does everyone have their Stein? Great, I've got your slug. Professor London.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. I have my Stein also. Oh, here's the poll. It was supposed to have launched, and now it's just launching right now. So take a second and fill out that poll. While you're doing that, I'm going to share my screen and get set up here. I feel like I do sort of feel like I'm teaching a class, which is kind of fun for me. I don't know about you guys. All right, well, welcome to Slugs and Steins. Like I said, I have a stein here. I'm not going to tell you what's in it, but use your imagination. So we've gotten to this moment in our recovery where elementary schools are either open or thinking about opening. Here in California, we're mostly thinking about opening, but I know that people are tuning in from all over the country, and you may be a little bit further along than we are. And this is the moment to start thinking about, what we should be considering and how we should be supporting children as they walk back in through those doors. Let's see. Only 6% out of California, a third are from Santa Cruz County, a third in the Bay Area, and about a quarter in other areas of California. So most of you are Californians out there, and probably if you are, schools are just starting to reopen for you now. So if you don't recognize this woman, this is Nadine Burke Harris. She is our California very first Surgeon General. And I just want to call your attention to the last line of her quote, which says, safe, stable, and nurturing relationships are healing for kids and for all of us. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind as I go through my talk today. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships are healing for kids and for all of us. Because that's what I'll be talking about today. I'll be talking about healing and how we support the healing process for children as they return to school. So the format of this presentation, there's going to be 3 sections, and I'm going to break in between each one and at the end so that you can ask some questions and we have a little bit more polling for you. So the first section is about trauma, what it is, and how do these adverse experiences affect children. The second is about why schools should focus on healing. And the third is about how we can use play, which is one of the focuses of my research, to support healing and how to make the most of those play breaks at school. So first, what is trauma? Trauma, unlike what you might think, trauma is not the actual event. It's your response to an event. So it's someone's response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that changes the way that you see yourself, the way you see other people, and the way that you see the world. So this trauma, your response could be anxiety or withdrawal, loss of confidence, phobias, or many other different kinds of responses. And there's not really a threshold defined for what creates trauma. Events that you might consider ordinary can trigger trauma in some people, and events that you consider extraordinary can leave others completely unfazed. So it's really about the response. There's no one way to gauge how people should be responding to an event. It's very personal. So with that in mind, COVID-19 is the first, what we're calling collective trauma event that we've experienced in decades. And in fact, just on Friday, the Director General of the World Health Organization was talking about this issue. If you look on my slide, the quote that's on the left of the screen is what he said on Friday last week. Almost the whole world is affected. Each and every individual on the surface of the world actually has been affected. So COVID-19 as a collective trauma event is unique, and its breadth, its depth, and its length make it really unprecedented. So we have not experienced this kind of mass trauma event in decades. The challenge here in trying to figure out how to mitigate this trauma is that people, children and adults, have been exposed to different kinds of trauma and different amounts of trauma-inducing experiences. So it's not as if we've all been sprinkled on the same amount of stress and trauma. We've all received different amounts, and our responses to it differs. And especially troubling is that in the US, there are disparities in who has experienced these trauma-inducing events. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a second. But one thing you might be wondering is, well, what are the long-term consequences of this collective trauma? And the answer is, we do not know. And we won't know for years. People are going to be studying this event and its many, many, many implications for years to come. And, if we ever get an answer, it's not going to be for a while. But I suspect that there are going to be pretty big repercussions over time, especially for children. So the way that we framed this issue of trauma before COVID is through, especially for children, is through this concept of adverse childhood experiences and adverse community experiences. I plan to use this exact same figure in my class next quarter on social welfare. But I like this figure. It's called the Pair of Aces tree. And it was designed by the Building Community Resilience Group at George Washington University. And what it demonstrates to you is that adverse childhood experiences, which are just trauma-inducing experiences, can happen at the child level, the individual level, something that's happening personally to a child, or they can happen at the community level, that there are things that are present in our communities that might be affecting more than one person at a time. So the examples that are on this tree come from before COVID, and I think we could remake this tree today with perhaps some of the same and perhaps different sets of ACEs in childhood and community experiences. I plan to have my students do that next quarter. That's their first assignment. What do you think belongs on this tree right now? But I won't make you guys do that because you're not in school anymore. But what's useful about this framework is that these ACEs have been studied extensively, and we know a little bit about what has happened as a result of them. So from COVID-19, we know that there have been ACEs in the area of health, right? Exposure to illness, hospitalization, even loss of life that children and adults have experienced in their families and their communities. There have been adverse experiences related to social situations. Isolation from support systems is a huge stressor. There have been family stressors around safety and limited opportunities for children to engage in healthy social and emotional development, which I'll define for you, but basically limited opportunities to engage with other people. There's been emotional ACEs. We know for sure that there are undetected cases of abuse and neglect. The reports of abuse and neglect in the child welfare system have gone down dramatically during this time. Of course, there's mental health issues that we're aware of that have cropped up at a much higher rate than previously. The economic consequences, for children, you think they don't notice, but that's actually not the case. When there's unemployment or underemployment, when there's financial stress in the household, children notice because their parents are stressed, and that can lead to increased relationship dysfunction, that can lead to fighting, it can lead to rationing of food, and other ways that children are aware. So even if children aren't the ones whose economics have been impacted, they know what's going on. And then, of course, our family relationships have completely changed. In addition to relationship dysfunction, what's happening now is, we're spending more time in different ways together than we ever were before. And parents are having to support their children in schooling. They're now their music instructor or their dance instructor, their PE teacher, and everything else, but with less support because of COVID-19, we're much more isolated. So all of these ACEs have been, I think everybody's been affected by one or more of these to a certain extent, but we know that children who are low income, who are Black, Latinx, from immigrant families, and those who are marginalized in so many other ways have experienced these ACEs in multiple ways and at much higher rates. So we know that not all children have been affected by COVID-19 in the same way. And that's really a challenge as we're thinking about reopening schools. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break here. If you have questions about everything I've said so far, feel free to put them in that Q&A box, which is going to be monitored. And then I have a poll for you, which you can look at. And let's see what people have to say. during the past year, have you personally experienced new stressors that have evoked a trauma response for you? And during the last year, have you experienced any impairments in how you normally go about your work, such as forgetting things or taking longer to complete tasks or being less productive? So go ahead and answer those questions. Let's see what people have to say. And if there are any questions in the Q&A, I'm happy to answer them right now. One of the things I'm anticipating is that people are going to ask, well, what are the effects of these? What are the long-term effects of these ACEs? Do we even know anything about that? And that's what I'm going to get to next.
Okay, we do have a few questions. Hi, everyone, it's Mike. Welcome to Slugs and Steins again. And just a reminder, we're taking questions in the Q&A box down on the bottom. You can ask your questions at any time, and we'll have a few more breaks in the middle. First question is from Eileen. Have you noticed increased stress from Asian American families related to Asian discrimination? Example, Wuhan virus, etc.
Yeah, so we are hearing a lot about that. For sure. I don't know specifically about whether children have been experiencing that, and especially at school, because the schools are just starting to reopen that. But I do think that you're right, absolutely, that Asian Americans have been experiencing increased discrimination, and that's really important. That's sort of sometimes people like these sort of constant small triggers are called microaggressions when people are experience some kind of discrimination, even at a very small scale, constantly. That can actually add up to extreme amounts of stress.
So we have a second question from Christopher. Is the last time a trauma like this happened World War II?
Well, that's what the World Health Organization has said. I could see in some places 9/11 being a trauma on that level, perhaps especially in certain regions, like in New York. I would imagine that, that would be a mass trauma event. Certainly, or for people who are from that area. But in terms of across the US and globally, yeah, probably since World War II, this is the first really collective trauma event we've experienced.
We had a quick question from SS. Maybe if you could go back 2 slides. He's asking about the use of the word ACEs, which I believe is an acronym, right?
Yeah, so ACEs stand for 2 things: adverse childhood experiences and adverse community experiences. So there are these things on the childhood level, like maternal depression and parents' divorce. And at the community level, things like poverty or lack of opportunity or poor housing quality and so forth. So ACEs is an acronym for adverse childhood and adverse community experiences.
So the question is how many, whether you want to move on or not. We could also, there's a question here about the Spanish flu pandemic a century ago and whether if there are any insights gained from that. We could also take that later.
I've thought about that, and I can answer it now because I have almost nothing to say about it. The environment that we're in right now in terms of schooling and access to technology and, the way that we're approaching this pandemic is so very different from what was even possible or available at that time, a century ago. They're just very difficult to compare in terms of children in schooling. And so I'm not sure there's a whole lot we can learn from that time period, to be honest. But there's plenty that we know already from the research that we can learn from and apply right now as schools are reopening. So that's where I'm going to go next. Okay. So have you ever yourself, or do you know anyone who says this? I hear this a lot. I work well under a deadline. I work well under pressure. Anybody ever heard someone say that? People who work well under pressure respond positively to the stress of this hormone that we release when we're stressed called cortisol. And at small levels, it actually can have a really positive effect on your body because it can make you more productive. It can make you, really get that work done. The problem is, oh, we have our results. Let me just finish my sentence and then I'll address those. The problem is that when it's prolonged or frequent, you've got this hormone cortisol raging in your body at all times, this fight or flight all the time. And that can be really difficult to control. Okay. So during the last year, have you personally experienced new stressors that have evoked a trauma response? 2/3 of you say yes, definitely have. During the last year, have you experienced any impairments to how you normally go about your work, forgetting things, taking longer to complete tasks, being less productive? Again, yes, 70% of you say that you have. And that relates pretty closely to what I'm talking about here. When you have this cortisol raging through your system and it's released in your blood at higher levels, it evokes different kinds of responses in your body. So for children and youth, we know that there's more anxiety, that there's impaired memory, that they have problems with mood control, and many other things. So this research is from before COVID. It's actually, a lot of this work is done on children who've been subject to abuse and neglect. And that's a very incredibly stressful situation, I'm sure. And, at very high levels of stress, we wouldn't really expect these children who've experienced toxic stress to be able to perform at school or anywhere else at the same rate as their peers who have no stress. What's important from this literature, from this research, is that the presence of positive buffering influences and relationships can mitigate this stress. So if children who are experiencing toxic stress have a strong relationship, either with a peer or a teacher or somebody else in their community, in their life, who makes them feel safe, who makes them feel heard and loved, that can actually help to mitigate the effects of this stress. And that's really important as we start thinking about school reopening, because we know that when there's long-term ACEs, again, these adverse childhood experiences, that children are more likely to be chronically absent, that they're less likely to be engaged in school, that they have attention problems. It shows up in their learning outcomes, that they're, unable to maintain literacy skills at the same level as their peers, that there's higher rates of grade retention, which means that they're held back a grade, that they're more likely to be in special education programs. And even that there's what we call social and emotional outcomes, changes in these. So these are things like, can a child regulate their emotions? Is there impulsivity or aggressive behavior, and other factors that go into their social and emotional development? So there's absolutely an effect of the stress on children. And it persists into adulthood. So adults who were subjected to high levels of adverse childhood experiences and more stress in their childhood have ongoing problems into adulthood in terms of disease, other risk factors for poor health, mental health problems, social problems, and even mortality, higher rates of mortality. So this is research that was published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine in 2010, but this is a pretty long studied phenomenon. There are a couple big studies that are ongoing that look at this, this problem of long-term effects of ACEs. So I hope I've convinced you now that this is a problem, that we can't just sort of hope that the stress that children have experienced during the last year is just going to magically disappear when they get to school. If you were in person, I would have you raise your hand or nod your head or something to show me that you're with me. And so since I cannot see you, I'm just going to assume that you're with me, that I've convinced you that this toxic stress is a really important thing to be thinking about. So the question is, what should schools do to prioritize mitigating the effects of COVID-19 when their students return? There's all these conflicting problems that children and families have faced. Of course, there's learning loss, which is what they're calling the issue that, kids haven't necessarily been learning as much as they could have been. There's health and hygiene issues that we need to be very serious about, social and emotional development issues that I've been talking about, and then one that hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention, but is very important as we're thinking about reopening schools, which is teacher stress and the stress that teachers have been under during this time of remote learning. So I'm going to start with health and hygiene. And I'm just going to say, like, yes, obviously we need to think about health and hygiene. That's a given. But what else? We can't only be thinking about health and hygiene, right? Because what's going to happen is kids are going to come back to school and their routines are going to look different. They're going to be wearing masks. They're going to be, going maybe just a day or two a week. They're going to be unable to hug their friends and hug their teacher. Maybe there's going to be plexiglass between their desks, or they're going to have to sit alone at a table at lunch. It's just not going to be the same. So we can't just think about health and hygiene. We have to think about other things too. The second thing, and educators in the education research world is really worried about this, is learning loss. So the major concern here is that remote learning is not nearly as effective as in-person learning, especially for the most vulnerable students. Think about special ed students and very, very young students who are perhaps not equipped to engage with the technology as they should, or the disparities we know have been happening in access to and comfort with technology. Families that are not English speaking, or families that have never had a computer in the home, or families that don't have good internet access, right? There's been disparities in how this remote learning has gone for children. But bottom line, I think what educators are worried about most is that students will not have learned the material that they needed in order to be prepared for the next grade. And so, there's this concern, we need to jump on it, right? We need to really work hard for what time we have left this year in order to get those kids up to speed. What I haven't heard really out there in the world so much, but is also happening, is there's more family time. Right? Everybody's home and nobody's going out. And so, with the exception of adults who have essential jobs and need to be out and about in the community, there's a lot more family time happening. There's a lot more time of parents and children learning together. We have been reading about, and one of my thesis students is finding this in his thesis, that there's less bullying happening because students are not engaging in person. There's less discrimination, fewer microaggressions happening. That's actually possibly a good thing for kids. And children are feeling more flexibility and autonomy over their time. I was talking with some friends this week who have high school students, and they were telling me that their kids don't actually want to go back to school. They like the flexibility that they have and the autonomy they have over their time. They don't think it's worth it to go back just for the end of the school year. So should we focus on social and emotional development? I think my answer here is yes. There are 5 main areas of social and emotional development that are incredibly important for young children, teens, adolescents, preteens to develop in order to be successful adults. And this is success not just in your social life and in your emotional life, but also people who have very well developed social and emotional skills are more successful in school. They're more successful in their work. And it actually leads, according to one of my favorite pundits, Jill Violet, who's the founder of the organization Playworks, it leads to our civil society. This is how we create a civil society, is by helping children to obtain and learn and use their social and emotional skills. These are things like self-awareness, self-management. Can you regulate your own emotions? Can you empathize with others and feel compassion? Can you maintain healthy relationships? And a very important one is, do you make good decisions and choices about your own behavior and your social interactions? And so I'm going to argue that social and emotional development is one of the most important things we should be focusing on as kids return to school. But I don't want to leave behind this issue of teacher stress. The point of this talk is not about teacher stress, but I think it would be wrong to assume that everything is going back to normal with the teachers. Once they get into the classroom, they're going to be all happy and ready to go. We really need to recognize that our teachers, like everybody else, have experienced trauma during this time. And it may be that they're not functioning at their highest capacity, that their memories are impaired. They're not paying attention at the same level as they normally do, right? And so I have a colleague in the education department at UC Santa Cruz, Laura Bartlett, who's been studying the effects of remote learning on teachers. And I myself have a number of friends who are teachers. I had a teacher panel in a class I was teaching last spring. And when my students asked the teachers on the panel how they were doing, one of the teachers broke down and cried and said that was the first time somebody had asked her how this was affecting her own personal experience with COVID. So I don't think we can assume that teachers are going in there at their peak. I think there's a lot of stress and concern about reopening and about health and safety. And I think there's the newness of this hybrid format and all the changes that have happened in the classrooms. And while there's excitement, I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of excitement on the part of teachers and all educators and students too. There's also some trepidation, and we have to recognize that. So what should we do? We should start with healing. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that in a second, but in the meantime, I'm going to stop for some questions. So put your questions in the Q&A, and we have another set of polls.
Okay, first question from Eileen. New York Times had an article in early 2020 stating that ACEs occur even in the most affluent families. Seems this shelter in place and isolation are happening regardless of socioeconomic status of the children. Have you seen this in practice?
Yeah, so ACEs are any kind of traumatic event. And we know that divorce and mental health problems and substance abuse and abusive relationships, those happen in families of all socioeconomic status, absolutely. And so ACEs are not just for low income or other vulnerable populations. They occur with everybody.
From Teresa, can you talk a bit about the potential benefits of students attending summer school programs, as will be available in Santa Cruz County?
Yeah, I was just reading today that the very first school district in the Bay Area has solidified its plans for summer. I don't want to come down on the side either yes or no, because I can see both sides of it. But, on the plus side, I do think that having kids engage in a regular routine for more than just 5 or 6 weeks until the end of the school year, or 10 weeks, whatever it is, if you've got 2 days a week in person through, say the end of May, that's really only like 10 or 12 in-person days between now and the end of the school year. And so to that extent, I really do think that having summer school is not a bad idea. But there's also, we have been in school this whole time and everybody needs a break. And so I guess I wouldn't want to see students lose their entire summer break. I would like to see them have some break, but I can see the advantages of having summer school. All right, so let's see what our poll said. Of the 4 priorities I listed, which do you think school administrators have been most concerned with? And then the tandem question, which do you think parents have been most concerned with? So 39%, the highest percentage, think that administrators are most concerned with health and hygiene, whereas half the respondents, 49%, think that parents are most concerned with learning loss. I would agree. I think you're right. I think parents are very concerned about learning loss. And I think almost nobody is concerned about teacher stress, except for perhaps my colleague, Laura Bartlett, and the many, many teachers that I know.
Should we take one more question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can I ask the last one for Christopher? So this is a follow-up to the summer school. How can this time help students and teachers ease back into the norm?
Yeah, I mean, how are we going to heal is a good question. That's what I'm going to turn to next. What specifically are we going to do to create this healing community that will be helpful, not just for students, but for students, for parents, and for teachers, to ease back in and to, reacquaint themselves with what it looks like to be part of a social world. So let's turn to that. So how might children react when they return to school? I can see a range of emotions, all of which would be normal. They might be happy, they might be excited. I hope that they are. It would be normal to be withdrawn or sad even. It would be normal to feel afraid or anxious or be aggressive or impulsive, confused or forgetful. All of these things would be very normal behaviors on the part of children as they return to school, or any other emotion, or having changing emotions and behaviors. A child who's happy in the morning could be withdrawn by the afternoon, or a child who's aggressive in the classroom could be supportive on the play yard, right? You just don't know. And so the concern for people who study play in school environments like me, the concern is some of these behaviors that we believe are normal could actually trigger a behavioral response at school. So for instance, if children are aggressive or impulsive, right, that could actually trigger them to be sent to the office and be punished or held in from recess, right, if they're not following the school rules. Or if they're confused or forgetful, they forgot to get that note signed by their parents, or they forgot to do their homework, to keep them in to finish that schoolwork instead of letting them play. And that's really where my concern lies, because I feel that the most important way to heal students is through play. The American Academy of Pediatrics months ago published an opinion piece that said that they recommended healing before mitigating learning loss. And the reason they gave for that was that they're concerned as pediatricians that by focusing on learning loss first, schools could potentially add to the trauma that children are experiencing. So imagine you go into school and you're just kind of getting used to the routine and seeing people again, and you're a little afraid because everyone's wearing masks. And the first thing that comes at you is, we've got to get you prepared for that spring testing. You guys are all far behind, or just little Johnny, you're far behind, and we've got to get you moving. That could be really stressful for children if we focus on what they've lost as opposed to, how to heal them from this traumatic experience that they've had. So we want to think about healing practices before we focus full on learning loss. One of the best ways to do that is to help build relationships between teachers and students and between peers. That's very healing, buffering, supportive ways of creating a healing environment. All schools, all elementary schools have some kind of character development or social emotional learning or positive school climate program. And this is the time to ramp those up. If you have kids in school, or you're a teacher or an administrator, and you know that your school or your school district has one of these programs, this is the time to lean on it big time. We need to be ready with extra supports for the most vulnerable children. We cannot expect our teachers to be able to address all of the many different kinds of behaviors that are going to be coming into the classroom. Some children may have experienced highly traumatic experiences, and we have to be ready and prepared to serve them with professionals. And so making sure that those supports are available, creating partnerships with community organizations to the extent that you can is really essential at this time. So, it's no surprise that I say focus on play, because I study play, but really play is the way to get this healing done. Play therapy is actually a very widely used clinical approach for working with abused and neglected children. It's an evidence-based approach. It's how children naturally learn and work through their experiences. Have you ever seen children playing school or playing grocery store or playing house, right? Children use play to work through the things that they've experienced. And that's for very young children, but even older children play act in different ways through video games, through their sports, through drama, right? To be able to understand their experiences. Play is importantly how children learn and practice those social emotional skills that I keep talking to you about, like self-regulation and cooperation, self-awareness, and so forth. When they're out on the play yard at school, that's when they get to practice those skills in an unregulated setting. It's just an incredibly important developmental space for them. One important thing is play can involve physical activity, and physical activity we know boosts attention and cognition, not to mention it's good for your body, it's good for your soul. So play can involve physical activity, which I think we should be trying to promote right now. Play often takes place outside. Well, outside is where we want to be, right? That's good for virus control. So the more play outside, the better. And then play builds relationships between children together, and when teachers are playing with their classes, between teachers and their classes, or between recess monitors and children on the play yard. It's just a really great way when you see people playing together, you know that they're building a relationship. And I've seen a lot of evidence of that in my own research. There are 3 issues that I'm concerned about that can undermine play as a healing environment at school. And I'm going to talk about each one of these 3. But the first is that there's unequal access to daily recess at school. Right now in the US, children who are low income, who come from low income communities, who are from urban communities, and who are Black or Latinx have less access to daily recess than children who are wealthier, living in suburbs and whiter. So already the most vulnerable children are being have less playtime available to them. So we have to think about how we're going to build play into the school day if it's not already in the recess bell schedule. The second is that withholding recess is really the most common punishment for elementary students for misbehavior and for missing schoolwork. And we need to think about that a little differently right now. Things that look like misbehavior today could be really normal reactions to stress and trauma. And we don't want to punish students for having these really normal reactions. And so we have to think really hard about that particular mode of punishment. And then third, even under the best of circumstances, you can't just throw kids out on the schoolyard, hand them a ball and say, great, go at it, right? You need to pay a little attention to what's happening out there to make this playtime safe and healthy and inclusive so that everybody's getting out of it what they should be. And this is the time to pay attention to these issues. So I have a little do and don't list, and I shared this with some school administrators last week. I gave a different version, shorter version of this talk to them, some Bay Area and Northern California superintendents and school administrators. But on the do list, not everybody in a school environment is a child development expert, and it may be that we need to provide some training. Not everyone may know about ACEs and trauma and how that affects behavior, right? And so if teachers generally would know about this because they're child development experts, but bus drivers and recess monitors and paraprofessionals, aides, other people at the school may not be child development experts, and they may need to have some training. We should absolutely encourage teachers to take play breaks and to be playful with their students. That's a healing practice that's well established. I would love to see 2 times a day outdoor recess for kids if we can make it happen in safe play spaces, of course, and to use what we call restorative practices. And I have a slide about that next. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. On the don't list, don't withhold recess or playtime for misbehavior. The concern that misbehavior is actually normal reaction to trauma is very high, and we don't want to confuse those things and make the trauma even worse. So we should not withhold playtime or punish children for behaviors that we might have punished them for before COVID. Similarly, we don't want to use playtime as a way to make up instruction or make up work. That's just not the time for it. Play is about healing, and we need to focus on healing. We should not force children to engage in certain play activities if they're resistant to do that. Making a kid play kickball when they don't want to is not a healing activity. They have to be able to have a little bit of choice in how they use their body during playtime. So I wouldn't force anybody into anything. And then especially important, let's make sure that all children have access to play at their schools or across grades within a school. It's really important that everybody has access and not just the most advantaged children. So I said on my do list was restorative practices, and I just am going to give you a little example here. It's adapted from a book, and I linked the book for you if you're interested in seeing it. But when we talk about restorative practices with elementary students, it's a kind of talk it out approach. So for the student who has a challenging behavior, you pull that child aside and you talk to them. Well, what happened, and who was affected by what you did, and what do you think needs to happen to make it right? And then similarly with the student who was hurt, same thing. What do you think happened? What was going on when you realized what had happened? What impact has this had on you or with other people? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? And to allow children to come to their own conclusions about how to make things right is a really important restorative practice, instead of yanking them off the play yard and sitting them in timeout, making them watch what other children are doing during the playtime, which I've seen plenty of in my years of observing recess across the country. So this is the time for healing, restorative practices. But even under the best of circumstances, as I said, recess and playtime at school is not always productive. I have spent more than a decade working with the organization Playworks, which is a national nonprofit that focuses on improving play and creating safe and healthy play in low-income schools across the country, and providing access to play at school for every child nationwide. If you look behind me, I have my book propped up here, Rethinking Recess. It's based on all of that data collection I did in collaboration with my partner Playworks. And some of the things that we learned through this work is that it's really important to have a common set of rules for games that everybody agrees to, and that games are set up in predictable locations. So, if you're going to play Foursquare, it's always here. If you're going to do wall ball, it's always on that wall. And that each game has its own space, so that the kids who want to jump rope are not running through the basketball game. The kids who are playing tag aren't, inadvertently running through the soccer game as they're doing that. That children get to pick what they want to do. And if they don't want to play a game with rules, they have space for creative and imaginary games that they come up with themselves. That's an incredibly important part of childhood. That there's equipment available and that someone is managing it in a central way so that everyone has access to it, that the adults are supporting play, and games are inclusive, meaning anybody should be able to play any game regardless of their ability level. And this one's my favorite. And if anyone wants to ask me about this in the Q&A, I could go on about it forever, but offering opportunities for youth leadership, even among elementary students, is a really important tool for getting kids engaged in making sure that things are working for playtime at their school. So that's the end of this formal talk. I have a resource page for you that's going to be put into the chat if there's any, if anybody wants to check out these resources. The last two, the second last one, this Ed Policy Inc. CA, is a research brief that I wrote for the organization PACE, Policy Analysis for California Education, on the importance of recess when California opens its schools. So it's sort of a mini version of this talk, but written out and shareable. It's open access. And then the last one is a link to my book. If you're an educator or you just really care a lot about recess and you want to take a look at the book and order one, you can do it through that link. So this is the time when we do sort of the bigger Q&A. And as I do that, I'm going to flip off this beautiful screen of aerial view of the UCSC campus and the beautiful Monterey Bay and go to my last slide, which is the ask. I was told through in prep for this that the alumni like to support faculty who give us Slugs and Steins. If you're one of those alums or a community member who is interested in supporting some more of this work, I'm currently working across all divisions on campus to spearhead an effort called Campus Plus Community. It is a community engaged center, research center on our campus that is going to support UCSC faculty and researchers, graduate students, postdocs to conduct actionable research in the community and with our UCSC undergraduate and graduate students. So C+C is meant to be a convener and a training organization to help support that work on campus and in the community. We are just trying to launch it now. So if you want to support that work, there's a link here that you can go to and then just put C+C or my name in the comments section. If you want to ask me questions about this during the Q&A, please do. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them now. We have a quick poll up and the results should come in a minute.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. So we've copied your resource links into the chat box here.
Great, thank you.
And also the contact information for your ask here. I guess everybody you can actually download that chat if you want to save them. We're also going to put that in our thank you email that goes out. We'll put it on our Meetup and our Facebook resources. So next question is from Christopher. What are the long-term concerns with developmental disorders that might have been found or hidden with the remote learn? And could there be any long-term brain rewiring in younger, less developed brains?
Yes, we know that remote learning was very difficult for children children who had already diagnosed learning delays or learning differences, because the interventions that we do with young children who have learning differences or delays are really kind of one-on-one, and it just doesn't work as well remotely. That said, we were doing that work and children were engaging with their teacher specialists during this time. I'm just going to pause for a minute to answer the poll. Have you used any of the following healing practices in your own life during the past year? And then I list a bunch of them. Almost everybody says yes. And if yes, have they helped you to reduce your stress? Again, almost everybody says yes. So, healing practices, attending to these healing practices can really make a difference. And so, if you think back to your own life and what you did to heal yourself, it does make sense to try and do that in school too. So back to young people with developmental delays, one of the things that has been very concerning is that, these delays they're best mitigated when we catch them very young. And so for kindergartners, the very youngest students who have been remote for most of the school year, it may have resulted in a delay in identifying these learning differences or delays. And again, what are the long-term consequences of that? We really don't know. How long will it take to get those identified with children? It might be that parents are more aware now of their children's learning, their learning strengths and their learning challenges, and maybe parents are better able to advocate for their children, I would hope. But we just don't know. I share your concern, Christopher, about that issue, and I do hope that we're able to identify children who need extra supports as quickly as possible.
Another question from James. Can you share your perspective on year-round school? It sounds like you value consistency, and James agrees. He's in favor of 6 weeks on and 1 off, or something similar.
Well, there's a question of whether I favor year-round school in general or whether I favor year-round school this year. This year is so different that I do favor, if not year-round, at least an extended school year so that, children who are just going back to school this month are able to gain a little normalcy back to their school year and have more in-person time to build those relationships, to feel like school is their place, especially for the youngest children, and especially for the ones who are new to school, anyone who transferred schools this year or is coming in for the first time as a kindergartner. So this year, I do think that having an extended school year is probably a good idea. As for whether I think year-round school is important in general, I guess what I would say to that is, if in California we're planning on having year-round school, I would not want it to be in response to what are perceived as achievement gaps. I would not want it to be the case that the schools where students are scoring less well on the standardized tests that they take once a year have to go to summer school, have year-round schooling, and the schools where children's test scores are higher do not. So if we're going to go year-round with school, I would like to see it done in an equitable way. And I would like to really understand, what we expect the gains from that to be. Like I said, I do think everybody deserves a break. Everybody needs a vacation. Being a teacher is a very high demand job. And I know teachers need a break. And so if we're going to be doing year-round school, is there a different way of thinking about summer that's about enrichment and perhaps not about instruction as we normally conceive of it? Can we do outdoor school in the summer? Can we do, all of the different enrichment activities like drama and music and art that tend to be cut from the budgets of the school years, right? What could we achieve during the summer that would allow for ongoing enrichment for children that might be slightly different than what we do during the school year? I would be in favor of thinking about that.
Fascinating. Question from Amy. Do the benefits of play extend to older students, middle and high school? What does recreation in a school setting look like there?
So absolutely. I think that everything that I've said about elementary student applies especially to middle school students. At least in California, many of the middle schools still have breaks. They have a kind of mid-morning break. Here in Santa Cruz, we call that brunch. And then they have a break at lunchtime. We call that lunch. And there's opportunity for play at both times. And in general, middle school students are not allowed to leave their campus during the school day. And so they're kind of hanging around. And I completely agree, the play looks different at that age than it does for elementary. Like 8th graders compared to 1st graders, although 5th graders compared to 6th graders doesn't look all that different. But so yes, absolutely in middle school. In high school, it is a little bit different because play is not part of the school day as it's not part of the normal school day already. And so, how high schools think about healing might be slightly different than the ways that elementary schools and middle schools think about healing, because it's unlikely that they're going to be able to take play breaks in the middle of the day. So what could they do instead of taking play breaks? Thinking about outdoor classrooms, thinking about, any kinds of activities that are going to build class community or school community. Reinstating school sports is one of the things that has healing potential, right? Also other kinds of extracurriculars like the band or or the drama program or other activities that get kids involved and engaged with their school environment some of the affinity groups at our local high school. We have a Black student union, we have a Latinx student union, we have an LGBTQ plus and allies, Rainbow Coalition, right? And to think about how to reinstate those clubs, the math club, the origami club, the, whatever club it is, the environmental club that's sort of the teenage version of play. And to the extent that we can make sure those opportunities are there for students and supported by adults, I think is really important.
So a question about the trade-offs between health and play from Jamie and Roberto. How can play be done in a safe way with COVID still being a concern? How do kids stay 6 feet apart?
I've been asking that question since we started this, and my brilliant colleagues at Playworks have actually put together a game guide, a social distancing game guide. I linked it in the set of resources that you have. If you click on that link that says www.playworks.org, it takes you to the Playworks game guide, and they have a whole set of games about social distancing. So you can do all kinds of games that way. Think about like, Simon Says, right? That's actually, kids love that game. That's a fun game. There's a leader and then there's a bunch of kids and everybody's trying to follow the leader unless you don't say Simon and then you're out, right? You could stand 6 feet apart and play that game and people would have a lot of fun with it. So there are options. There's also the option, if you want to play soccer, you have to wear a mask. Or if you want to play basketball, which is going to get you in close contact, you have to wear a mask, right? So it's possible that we can use masks in some activities and not masks in others. It really depends on, it's really a decision for the county health department and the schools. But, I tend to agree that a 6-year-old might have a really hard time figuring out how far apart 6 feet is. And so we may need to have some markings on the ground, or we may need to, one of the games that Playworks has is a game called Noodle Tag, right? Those long styrofoam pool noodles that you use in a pool, right? So if the school buys a bunch of these noodles, the kids can hold on to one end and you have to tag somebody with the other end of the noodle when you're playing tag. That's 6 feet apart or thereabouts. And so, you can play safely that way. So just take some creativity. Maybe that not everybody's favorite games are available, but could be that a game like Foursquare or Tetherball is available because you can stand apart, and maybe other games like, or games like Jump Rope are available, and some other games just need to wait a little longer.
Okay, next question from Eileen. Do you think in light of the pandemic and children being isolated so long at home with online schooling, is there a benefit to perhaps schools considering making recess a bit longer for students to increase healing?
Yes, as much recess as possible. Yes, I do believe that. In some schools, recess is like 10 minutes. I mean, it's really short and it's hardly enough time to get anything done. So absolutely, especially when kids are first coming back and they haven't been in person in a group of 10 or 15 kids, some of these children in a year, right? It is going to take some time to reacquaint them with what that's like. And so absolutely, the more playtime, the better. And, to the extent here in California, our weather is good. It was beautiful here in Santa Cruz today. Like, to the extent that you can do other kinds of activities outside, I would say go for it. Story time can be outside. What kinds of science lessons can we learn by walking around our school grounds? Any time that allows kids to be sort of more informal and able to connect with each other and with their teacher is going to be helpful.
From James. What is a good way to address reticence and refusal to participate?
So we should not force children to engage in a game if they don't want to, or engage in play if they don't want to. You know, children may be genuinely afraid of going back to school and getting the virus. And if that's the case, parents should think about whether they want to send their child or not. But if a child is afraid and is afraid they're going to get the virus by playing a game that the rest of the class is playing, then we should not force them to do that. Now, we can't let kids just like run around unsupervised. So teachers should be prepared if they're going to bring their kids out to play during class time. They should be prepared to think about the space and say, okay, you don't want to play this game, that's fine, but you need to stay on the basketball court and you're not allowed to leave the basketball court. You can do whatever you want on the basketball court, and I won't make you play kickball or whatever else we're playing, but you have to be there to be safe so that, you know, the teacher can keep their eye on the student. So I think that teachers just need to be prepared with a plan B for their students, so that not everybody who wants to engage has to. Who doesn't want to engage has to.
Okay, from Carly, many teachers I know feel overwhelmed, and when SEL comes up, they confess they don't feel qualified to do this. I think if they understood play as a part of SEL, they may be more inclined to do this. Also, how can teachers be helpful to get this training, or helped to get this training, sorry?
Yeah, I agree with you that, so SEL stands for social and emotional learning. And a lot of schools have specific programs that are SEL programs, where teachers are provided a curriculum that they then teach to students, and it happens in different ways in different places. The thing about play is that that's where social and emotional skills are built naturally. There's no curriculum needed, right? So the curriculum is, do we know the rules to the game, and can we make enough teams so everyone can play, right? And so teachers don't have to do a whole lot except for support play to promote social and emotional skill development when their kids are playing. And that's the message I'm trying to get out, that, you know, by focusing on play as healing, what we're doing is allowing children to do the most natural thing that they want to be doing anyway. And it really is going to help them when they are then later required to really sit still and try and learn, right? And continue on their learning in person as opposed to over the computer. How can we get teachers the training that they need in order to do this is a very hard question. It really requires buy-in from school leaders and administrators to view play as an important part of the school day. And I'm going to be honest, you know, that's not the case everywhere. There are school districts around this country that banned recess for decades. Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, all of them had no recess for, 20, 30 years because they felt that allowing children playtime at school was taking away from their learning time, and that especially the most vulnerable children needed more learning time because they had to, get their test scores up, right? They had to make the grade so that schools didn't lose their funding. That was under our old No Child Left Behind regime. And, today we think about it a little bit differently. And in California, especially, we do. But California has we have no laws, we have no regulations that mandate recess in our schools, where there's no recommendations for how long it should be or what should happen during that time. It's not a specific part of school wellness plans. There's really no guidance at all from the state level on what we should be doing about playtime and thinking about recess in schools. And that needs to change.
Well, on that topic, from John, what is the UC system and the UC Regents doing as a state and national influencer to advocate for recess and physical activity, free play, etc.? Time in the face of STAR testing and an academic achievement culture that does not value SEL, comprehensive health education, and physical ed professionalism in today's schools.
Yeah, as far as I know, the UC system is doing nothing to advocate for those things. But as an alum, if you're an alum who asked that question, if you want to start something up, you know, sign me up, I'm with you. But right now the UC system is not taking any kind of action on this issue, as far as I know.
Maybe I'll extend that question a little bit. This is Mike. I mean, what could the UC system do as influencers? So what should we be advocating for? Then we'll get to a question from Stephanie.
You know, the UC system, you know, many of our schools in the UC system have schools or departments of education. We have teacher education programs across many of our campuses. UCSD has a very, very strong teacher education program. We could be the leaders in curricular development in terms of teacher preparation. And we could, you know, say mandate that social emotional learning or that training in how to support kids in play is part of the curriculum that we use when we're training teachers who are getting a multi-subject credential to teach elementary school. You know, the UC system could do that, and we have not. That's one way that I can think of off the top of my head.
So next question from Stephanie. Thanks for sharing your work. Could you give some examples of student leadership opportunities that can be provided through play? Also, how should play be implemented at the schools going forward, in your opinion, through the efforts of teachers, from administrators, counselors?
Okay, I'll answer the first one first. So how can we support youth leadership for play? You know, this is one of the most effective tools I have ever seen in my life for behavior management. So at the schools that I visited that are implementing the program PlayWorks, they have a program called the Junior Coach Program. And junior coaches are 4th and 5th grade students who are trained by their recess coach to support either their own recess or younger children's recesses through managing games. So I was at a school, I can't tell you where, but I was at a school that was in the Southwest, and they had like a combination of recess monitors. There was a parent, there was a young man who was kind of new to the school. There was a counselor who kept being called in and out. And there was a bunch of different games going on at this recess. It was maybe 2nd and 3rd graders who were out there. And the only person on the play yard who was actively playing with kids and who was helping them to resolve their conflicts in the middle of a game was a 5th grader. The 4th and 5th grade junior coaches at this school ran the show. They were out at all the different games. They were, you know, helping kids, the younger kids, to remember the rules. And if there was an argument, they did a rock, paper, scissors. You know, they'd go do, right, to do rock, paper, scissors and help them resolve a conflict. I saw them, if there was something that really went wrong, they would say, okay, hold on. And then they would go get a recess monitor to step in and help resolve the problem in a different way. So, you know, young people are really capable of supporting healthy, positive play themselves. And it's so great for the younger kids when there's older kids out there on the play yard, because there's someone, like a role to look up to. You know, the 2nd and 3rd graders, oh, when I'm a 4th and 5th grader, I really want to be a junior coach. And then the older kids really enjoy getting to mentor the younger ones. You know, there's just not that many opportunities for leadership development in elementary school. And this is a really easy one. The kids know how to play these games anyway. So this is a really easy one. But the other thing I saw was teachers using this junior coach status as a way of helping kids to keep their own behavior in check. So, you know, the junior coaches, if you pick kind of a mix of kids, those who are natural, like leaders in the classroom, who are really well behaved and follow the rules, and those who are natural leaders on the play yard, maybe they're rule stretchers, pushers, maybe they're aggressive players, that sometimes get into altercations, right? By giving them a little bit of authority, it actually helps them to rein in their own behavior and to make sure they're modeling good behavior for other children. So it can be a win-win situation if it's supported well. Okay, so that was the first question. Remind me what the second part of the question was.
Oh, 1 second. Let's see. Where were we? How should play be implemented at the schools going forward, in your opinion, through the efforts of teachers, administrators, counselors?
So I think play needs to be, I think we need to reconfigure what we mean when we're talking about play. Normally we think about play as recess and PE. And at many elementary schools in California, at least, PE is taught by the classroom teacher. Could we just give the teachers a game handbook like the one from Playworks? There's nothing that has to be done, at the school level. We've got these games already designed, available for free online, and give teachers a couple of tools that they can use to play with their own kids. But again, teachers are not the only ones who interact with children. There are counselors interacting with children. There are, teacher specialists who are interacting with children. There are paraprofessionals, aides, recess monitors, school bus drivers, lunch monitors, and a variety of other people, principals, assistant principals, a lot of different people who are interacting with children. And all of these people need to understand that a range of behaviors are normal for children who have experienced trauma, and that building relationships and playing is a great way to heal them. So it's not just teachers. And in fact, I feel like teachers may be the people who know that the best. And it may be all the other people at school who need to be educated on this.
Well, we have had many great questions. We have another excellent one from Heather. When children are bonding at recess, for example, holding hands, arms around each other, playing tag, sharing items, etc., I don't know how I would pull them apart. They need the human touch, and these games are for their social and emotional development. How should we handle this? At what point do we pull them apart?
I mean, it depends a lot on how the school has implemented its in-person or hybrid classes, right? So if the school is taking a pod approach where they're bringing in, say 10 children that are only going to be exposed to each other throughout the whole school day, and there's not, no matter where they are, they go together, the risk of having them hold hands or hug is much lower than if a school is just opening up in person for everybody all at once. And so I think it really needs to be tailored to the overall school approach to health and hygiene. And so I can't say there's a one size fits all approach. In some schools, holding hands or hugging might be okay. Again, if it's just like 10 children who are potting together at all times and they're not interacting with other kids or other teachers during the school day. And in other schools, that might just not be allowable. But in all cases, it's important to make sure that children who are hugging are doing so mutually, and that there's, mutual agreement on touching, that's not inappropriate in any way. And I'm not suggesting like abusive, inappropriate, but just that people should have autonomy over their bodies and who they're interacting with them.
All right, we have a bunch of good questions from James. I'm going to try and paraphrase a few and combine them. He'd like to know about other play options besides recess, things like cooperative games, maybe like online games or fictional literature. I wonder if that means like story time, like reading books in class, and art classes and self-expression and dance.
Absolutely. I think all of these kinds of activities where children are able to express their emotions through creativity are really important. Can we do art projects outside? Can we do nature projects outside, right? What are the kinds of ways that we can allow children to express their emotions through their activities? Now, play is particularly healing. And if we're thinking about using art or music as a healing moment, we should be prepared to have somebody going through that to make sure that if something something comes up, that there's a referral made to some counselor or somebody who can help work with the child or the family if a particularly traumatic event surfaces through those activities. But I agree with you, the more we can think about how to do things outside and playfully with children, the better. So, story time, absolutely. Wouldn't that be lovely to sit under the shade of a big tree? Or maybe the school, if there's not a big tree, schools can put up a canopy or a tent, not with walls, but, one of those shade tents. And there can be some camping chairs out there for the teachers to sit in, or some blankets that can be brought out, or towels or some kind of mats that children can sit on, so that they can be outside and enjoying the fresh air and connecting with each other, but safely, safe from the virus.
Question from Warren. How is the learning loss, especially for students from poor neighborhoods, to be made up? Is the curriculum adjusted? Say 10th grade now also has to cover what was missed from 9th grade?
Mm-hmm.
Or are schools going to just go forward with return to in-person instruction as if the COVID gap hadn't occurred?
I doubt that schools are just going to move forward as if the COVID gap had never occurred. I would be surprised if that's the case. But I do think it will look different depending on the grade and the class and the subject, and the student. I think that some students who have highly educated parents have been able to survive this time period with a lot of support from home. They may have actually learned more. They may have, if you have a parent who's an engineer, for instance, perhaps someone who would normally have been just focusing on algebra is now as far as calculus. But the reverse is also the case, that children whose parents are not highly educated may not have gotten enough support in their education, and they may be behind. How to make up for this learning loss, I feel like I should leave that to the professionals. I can't say particular strategies that one could use, but what I can say is that focusing on that before students feel good about being back at school is not going to work. So we do need to wait a little bit to make sure students feel comfortable and safe, connected to their schools, and then figure out how we're going to mitigate this learning loss. And again, it could be summer school, or year-round school. It could be through, like after-school programs. It could be 5th grade has to cover some of what 4th grade did not cover. One very smart person I know suggested we need to add a grade to make up for this year. So it remains to be seen even what the learning losses are. To be honest, we haven't hit spring testing yet. So we can't really compare where students are this year compared to where they were last year. And last year may not be a great benchmark either, because everyone was traumatized after having just gone remote. So it would have to be the year before. And so we just are going to have to wait and see what it looks like. It may be that it's not as bad as we think, because students have had all these other enrichment experiences by spending more time with their parents and spending more time reading together, that they may have been able to make progress in ways that we weren't expecting. Or it could be that we're seeing increased disparities in achievement, which would be very concerning. And we would have to, come up with ways of remedying those. Remains to be seen. We have not figured this out yet.
Wow. I know we have a ton of questions coming in, but we're almost out of time. I'm going to take one more. Maybe we have time for a quick answer. This is from Elena. I'm really encouraged to see there's a lot of innovation people are thinking up out there. Elena runs a theater ed org that is pivoted from literacy through theater to focus on SEL through drama. The key to this work is a deep partnership with teachers to maximize the connection with students. Bringing play into the classroom and integrating this idea beyond recess is crucial. We can model this with teaching artists. Any thoughts on how CBOs can advocate for stronger partnerships with school systems?
I love that. Thank you so much for that, Elena. It's exactly what I'm talking about. CBOs are community-based organizations. And, if you run one and there's a school district or a school that's near you and you're willing to do a partnership, don't wait for the school leader to reach out to you. They are overwhelmed. If you have something that you can offer to support children, if you have some, a volunteer time, or you've worked in the school before, and so you've got some kind of existing relationship, step forward and offer to help out, right? Even if the school can't manage to incorporate a theater program in the middle of the school day, maybe they can support an after school program. Maybe you can run like a recess based or a before school drama program. Maybe there's a way of connecting an online, a hybrid versus in person. There's a lot of, I'm sure you're very creative because you're in the theater arts. And I just think that it would be a great time to reach out to the school or school district that's in your neighborhood and offer to assist with this. Because I just agree with you so much. It's, how can we support SEL through all these different creative ways?
Wow. Yeah, I wish we had time to get all these questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. Maybe Rebecca can answer some in the chat, or which you can look at later.
If your question is truly, truly burning and you have to have an answer, just send me an email.
Oh yeah, we have your contact information up. So before we go, I'd like to call your attention one more time to Rebecca's final slide with information on how to support her program. If you were moved by her lecture tonight, please take this opportunity to support her important work moving forward. We've chatted that out in the chat box one more time if you want that link. So finally, you can use the little applause feature in the back. If you could get a big round of virtual Q&A box applause for Professor London. Thank you, Rebecca, for sharing your fascinating and your vitally important research with us this evening. This talk has been recorded for those of you asking. It will be available in a day or two on the UC Santa Cruz Arts and Lectures YouTube channel. And we'll send that information out in the thank you notes. Also, a big round of thanks to the staff of the Alumni and Special Events offices for helping us and for putting this on, setting up the online forum, all this work and magic taking off behind the scenes. Thank you, Cara, Diana, Paulina, and Kristen. Our next event is Monday, April 12th with headline Professor of Biomolecular Engineering, Rebecca Dubois. Some of you may remember she was here, one of our first speakers a couple of years ago. Professor Dubois studies the molecular mechanisms of human virus surface and replication proteins using a diverse toolkit of structural and biochemical techniques. She uses her discoveries to design novel vaccines and antiviral therapeutics. You can probably see where this is going. Before joining UCSC, she was a postdoctoral fellow at the Pasteur Institute in Paris and at St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis. She received her PhD in biochemistry from UC San Diego and her bachelor's from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Meanwhile, there's a bunch of events this week we think you might be interested in. Wednesday, March 10th, one of the crown jewels at UCSC, the Everett program in the Social Sciences Department. They have a webinar called Reimagine Everything, Leveraging Transformative Justice Theory to Advance a World Beyond Incarceration. There's also a two-part free webinar series coming up, first part March 11th and a week later, March 18th. This is with entrepreneur Shekhar Dio and sponsored by the UC Silicon Valley Extension. This is a kind of a free preview of his class. It's called AI for Startup Executives. The series addresses how to develop an AI strategy that will drive growth in your company. March 18th, we have a CRAW lecture, Cultivating Leaders and Solutions for Coastal Sustainability. Professor Ann Kapuscinski discussing the new Coastal Science and Policy Graduate Program at UCSC. All of these you can find at events.ucsc.edu on the calendar. And finally, we'd like to be one of the first to share with you that Alumni Week 2021 website officially went live today. The Alumni Weekend of years past has been reimagined this year as a full week of virtual events that you can pick and choose from, like for example, a live reading of Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors. You can read more at alumniweekend.ucsc.edu. If you're an alum, you should have gotten an email today. So on behalf of the UC Santa Cruz Alumni Association, thank you for joining us tonight, and please come back on April 12th for our next event. Good night, everyone.
Good night.